Boa tarde. We are in Germany, it's 6 o'clock, we start. Boa tarde, ladies and gentlemen. Most of you know me. My name is Nina Sartori. I'm the science counselor here at the embassy. I will lead you through the evening. I will make the master of ceremony. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed the little snack we offered from the Central do Cerrado. They are outreach partners in one of our research projects on sustainable land use in the Cerrado, which is financed by the German Ministry of Agriculture. Not research, but nevertheless a research project. I welcome everybody to our first science diplomacy talk. I'm very happy that you came here. I wanted to have 100 guests. There are 100 chairs and we are full. Thank you for coming. Yes, our first science diplomacy talk. Many more will follow in the path that Friederike, my dear partner, and I will manage to organize. So, this event is together with DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, and the German Research and Innovation House in São Paulo, and many thanks to the colleagues for the great collaboration. With the VBI conference taking place here in Brasília, this is really a great opportunity, otherwise we would not have managed to have practically representatives of the whole Brazil here, of so many different states. So thank you very much for coming and taking the opportunity to visit Germany tonight and to engage with us in this discussion. Tonight, yes, and not to forget, thank you for the dear EU colleagues. I mean, that many of you came here, the European Science Counselors. Tonight we will be discussing the topic of global health from different perspectives in a time where the political order is changing, but not the needs of international health politics. I thank all participants of the podium to agree to discuss on this not easy topic tonight. And not to forget, with the symposium and the reception later, we will also celebrate a century of the DAAD existence. So I hope to see you all later at the reception as well at the residence. And with this little opening, we start now with the introduction to our science diplomacy talk, and I pass the floor to our chief diplomat. Please welcome the ambassador of Germany, Ms. Bettina Kadenbach.
Thank you, Nina. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are currently experiencing, to put it mildly, turbulent times. This turbulence is created and fueled by fake news and lies. Moreover, political measures are being taken with no statistical or scientific basis, yet they have far-reaching consequences worldwide. It seems the right moment to talk about science diplomacy. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, and contrary to what Nina has said, I think you would have come anyway because the topic is that important. With this inaugural science diplomacy talk, we want to highlight the crucial role that science has played over the decades when it comes to international cooperation based on mutual trust and keeping channels of communication open even when political differences arise. Few other fields rely as heavily on international collaboration as science does. Scientific advancements do not stem from isolated work in a laboratory, but rather from the systematic exchange of knowledge. The more international this exchange, the better. An excellent example of this is the Max Planck Society, one of the most renowned organizations worldwide, specializing in basic research. In the past decade, its proportion of scientists who hold a foreign citizenship has risen from 30% to nearly 60%. At present, some 900 researchers from over 130 nations work for the Max Planck Society. This international aspect is a key factor in its success. Science is a champion of international collaboration. It cannot be stressed enough. Between Germany and Brazil alone, there are more than 655 university partnerships. In other words, academically oriented diplomatic channels of communication. This is merely one example involving only 2 countries, and it only takes into account their university partnerships. The global interconnectedness of all scientific institutions is almost impossible to quantify. This means that in international scientific collaboration, we can rely on a solid, highly diverse, and independently organized network of cooperation that cannot be so easily disrupted. Nonetheless, the subject we are addressing today is not an easy one. Let me illustrate with 3 examples. First, the global political situation has become more complex in recent years, to say nothing of the past few weeks. Science and technology have increasingly turned into geopolitical currency. Quantum computing, artificial intelligence, battery research, and vaccine development are all cutting-edge fields of research closely tied to a nation's economic power. Those who secure breakthroughs first in these highly competitive fields will clearly gain a significant competitive advantage. Second, global climate research paved the way for conferences such as the COP, and the IPCC provides vital scientific data each year that serve as a basic for the International Climate Summit. However, one of the greatest challenges in environmental policy today is the disinformation circulating in the climate debate. How should the scientific community and policymakers address this issue? Third, climate change is closely tied to global health, which is the focus of our talk today. Ongoing global warming poses a serious challenge to the health of people around the world. The pandemic demonstrated how crucial the international exchange of information and knowledge is. Diseases, after all, do not stop at borders. The World Health Organization was under pressure even before the United States announced to withdraw from it. How can scientific cooperation help in bridging these divides and, beyond political differences, contribute positively to the global knowledge base and to improving health? I look forward to hearing the diverse perspective of our panelists on these questions today, and I sincerely thank everyone involved for agreeing to participate and engage in the discussions. I'm particularly pleased that Professor Wittmann from Johannes Kepler University Linz will be giving the lead-in presentation. In February, the European Commission presented a strategy for a coherent European framework for science diplomacy, to which you contributed. We are organizing this science diplomacy talk on global health in collaboration with DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service. I think it's kind of a brand name that you're all familiar with, and DWIH, the German Center for Research and Innovation. Katharina Fourier, in your capacity as head of DAAD and DWIH in Brazil, I'm delighted that following today's panel discussion, we will have the opportunity to raise a glass with you to celebrate 100 years of DAAD, the cornerstone of German science diplomacy. Research is inherently long-term and only marginally influenced by electoral terms. Nonetheless, in challenging times, science diplomacy has a special role to play. The key is to continue cultivating a culture of dialogue and exchange and to keep open the many channels of communication. On that note, I wish you an engaging event and stimulating discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Very good. And for this introductory words and illustrating the tensions in which international scientific cooperation finds itself. Katharina, may I ask you to the floor to give an overview now about a century of DAAD.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor Wittmann, Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, for your inspiring words and for hosting us this evening at the embassy here. Throughout this anniversary year, the DAAD is celebrating its 100th birthday at events all around the globe. I'm especially delighted that we now have the opportunity here in Brazil to reflect together on the past, to discuss present challenges, and to look ahead to the future. Change by exchange. This has been the guiding principle for the German Academic Exchange Service for 100 years. Today we celebrate a century in which the idea has endured that encounters, cooperation, and scientific dialogue can achieve more than political boundaries ever could. Especially now, as crisis, fake news, and resurgent nationalism challenge our world, this belief has never been more relevant. Over the past 10 years, the DAAD has experienced 4 formative phases, and in all of them, the diplomacy of science diplomacy, has played a central role. I will start with the first phase, departure and rupture, and the question, how does a global network emerge from a single idea? It all began in 1925 with a small group of dedicated students led by Karl Joachim Friedrich in Heidelberg, who understood how vital international academic exchange was for understanding and collaboration, especially at a time when Germany, after the First World War, was internationally isolated. With great idealism, the Academic Exchange Service was founded and scholarships were awarded in cooperation with the USA. Soon, partnerships with the United Kingdom and France followed. In early 1931, the Academic Exchange Service is merged with the German Academic Exchange Point of the Association of German Universities and the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and is given the final name, the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD, Deutscher Akademischer Austauschdienst. With the rise of National Socialism in 1933, the DAAD's work has deeply affected. The organization was co-opted by the regime, its program adapted by Nazi ideology, and many people were excluded from exchange. During the Second World War, international exchange nearly ceased altogether, and the DAAD was dissolved in 1945. Yet, only a few years later, in 1950, the DAAD was re-established, this time as a symbol of an open, peaceful, and internationally oriented Germany. The second phase, new foundations. How does a new beginning become global responsibility? With the guided principle, never again war, never again National Socialism, a new era began. An independent organization emerged, enabling Germany's return to the international scientific dialogue. In the following decades, the DAAD became a pioneer of Germany's foreign cultural and educational policy, opened new offices worldwide, initiated partnerships with the Global South, and led the foundation for today's global networks through initiatives like the lectureships program, and the first surplus scholarships. The third phase, crossing borders. How can education and exchange transcend boundaries? Since 1975, the DAAD has continuously adapted to new challenges. With integrated study abroad programs, focused support for German as a foreign language, and the adoption of the Erasmus program, academic mobility and European cooperation were further intensified. The fourth phase, future needs exchange. In the 21st century, the DAAD expanded its role as the world's largest founding organization for international academic exchange. Digitalization, support programs for researchers from crisis regions, targeted engagement in the Global South, and an active commitment to shaping science diplomacy have become hallmarks of today's DAAD. Now, as we mark the 100th anniversary, the DAAD stands for an open, resilient, and globally connected academic landscape, with over 3 million alumni and more than 400,000 international students in Germany at the moment. Going back to the second phase, an era of rebuilding internationalization and global expansion, this phase was of particular significance for German-Brazilian relations. In 1972, the DAAD opened one of its very first offices outside Europe, here in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. Brazil thus became an early focus of German science diplomacy and a place where academic exchange and cooperation could flourish even in challenging times. This path has continued, most notably with the founding of the German Center for Research and Innovation in São Paulo, the DWIH, DWIH, São Paulo, in 2012. Both institutions, the DAAD office in Rio and the DWIH in São Paulo, stand as examples of a sustainable exchange, innovative cooperation, and the firm conviction that science and innovation are key drivers of economic, social, and ecological development. Science diplomacy runs like a common thread through every phase of the DAAD's history, and its importance continues to grow. Recent years, marked by the pandemic and by the challenges of climate change, have made it clear. Global challenges can only be overcome by scientific cooperation, mutual trust, and ongoing international dialogue. This is especially evident in the field of global health. Only when research findings inform policy decisions and new partnerships emerge across borders and sectors can we tackle global challenges. And at the same time, we must meet the challenge of countering disinformation and attacks on science. The panel discussion to follow will address these issues. How can science and diplomacy together chart paths through multiple interlinked crises, such as those in global health and the environment? What does it take for science to assume real responsibility in laboratories, governments, and society at large? Especially in the current political climate, our 100th anniversary is more than a reason to look back. I really think it's a mandate for the DAAD's next 100 years. So science diplomacy and international exchange remain essential if we are to shape the challenges of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katharina, for this impressive overview. The DAAD has been doing really a great job for the last 100 years, and I hope that the new government will translate their verbal announcement of strengthening the DAAD in tons of financial funding money. Let's see. We are now approaching the core of our event, and I'm very proud to announce Professor Veronika Wittmann from the Johannes Kepler University in Austria. Thank you for coming all the way from Europe to hold our keynote speech today here and set the cornerstone of the podium discussion later. Veronika Wittmann is an expert on science diplomacy and global politics. She is the Associated Professor for Global Area Studies at the Faculty of Social Sciences and Economics. And she was one of the scientists, experts, appointed by the European Commission by the design of the strategy on science diplomacy, which actually was published this year in February. So I hope everybody is reading it so we know what the ways to take. Professor Wittmann, we are keen to listen to you. Please, the floor is yours.
Ambassador, Madame Kadenbach, Honorable Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be among with you today and share some insight. I will not so much focus on this report. I know some of you people actually have been already reading the report, but maybe to give you a short insight on where this bridge between science and diplomacy, some of the concepts that we do have at our disposal, and some of the perspectives. We had a lot talk now on global challenges. There are enormous global challenges ahead of us, what science diplomacy can offer. And let me start by looking at this term of global challenges. I'm sure in the panel discussion we will raise the issue of the pandemic. That is one global challenge that was recently shaking humanity. Another of these challenges is, we've been mentioning COP30 coming up in Brazil. Global warming, the loss of biodiversity, economic turmoils, transnational terrorism. You can name any of these. These are all challenges that are global by nature. And there are three main characteristics. If you look at these global challenges, first of all, they transcend conventional borders. So each and every one has to look beyond what we look inside. A scientist cannot stay in an ivory tower anymore. We need to go and talk with diplomats, with people from ministry, working with civil society, and so on and so on. The second feature is, and I say this very specifically, no state in the world can manage this challenge on its own, and even not the strongest military power in the world. Of course, there might be some people in realpolitik who say, oh, la, 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 I can do everything on my own, I don't need partners. This is not how you will manage or deal with any of these global challenges in a proper and in an adequate way. And the third feature that comes up here is there is a clear scientific dimension involved. So all of these three characteristics are there if we talk of global challenges. The World Economic Forum has, since a long time, been publishing every year the so-called Global Risk Report. This is like maybe another way of dealing with challenge, to label it as a risk. A risk may be, you know, shaking. It wakes you up and say, there's a risk coming along, we need to do something about it. I don't want to go into detail, just to look at this graphic. The Global Risk Report is, you know, the report that is there from the participants of the Global World Economic Forum. This is not only scientists, this is not only media people, this is people from business, people from realpolitik, and they are there and they are asked, what do you consider as the main global risks of humanity? And they differentiate these risks, and this you can clearly see here with the colors. Some economic risks, which in blue color, some technological risk you find in lila, some of the societal risks you find listed here red. Of course, the top 5 here, the infectious diseases, this is related to COVID-19 and the pandemic. But it's quite interesting here in this decade of the top 10 global risks being mentioned at the World Economic Forum, you can see here the top risks are environmental related risks, colored in green. So this is a clear sign. All of these risks are interconnected with one another, and health, the global health issue, is to a large extent related to environmental risks. So just to keep this picture in mind, I find it very interesting that here you have a diversity group of people. What is their answer? What do they give you as an answer if they are asked what do you imagine as a global risk in terms of impact and in terms of likelihood? Let me now briefly look at this concept of science diplomacy. There is one quotation which has been widely used on what science diplomacy is about. I here quote Nina Fedorov saying, "Science diplomacy is the use of scientific interactions among nations to address the common problems facing humanity and to build constructive, knowledge-based international partnership." And there are different, pillars on science diplomacy. The one which will be in our focus today is science for diplomacy, how scientific collaboration can enable and support diplomacy. Of course, you can have diplomacy for science as well. That would, like trained diplomats, would establish an enabling environment for academic scholars to set up a constructive exchange for that. Of course, you have science in diplomacy as well. Vienna International School of International Studies, you train people going to international organizations, to governmental bodies, or to the diplomatic corps. And then you have science in diplomacy. And diplomacy in science is one of the pillars we have been working out in the report, actually, which is something, I think it's a bit in an embryonic state at the moment. That means we as academics, we as scientists, we need to learn more the diplomatic tools. So like both need to learn from each other, so to say. I will, from the moment on here, focus on scientific cooperation to improve international relations between states. Scientific diplomacy is here considered as a relevant stakeholder of any kind of multilateralism, and it elevates the role of science to address global challenges. I will come to this point later on. And of course, academia, it has been mentioned already, works globally across national borders on problems of common interest and is therefore ideally placed to support emerging forms of diplomacy that require non-traditional alliances of states, sectors, and international non-governmental organizations. Being, of course, myself a scientist for more than nearly 30 years actually now, I know if I talk on science, this is an area I can talk about. So as a scientist, I say, of course, science is clearly designed based on scientific values. And this is something like rationality, transparency, universality that cuts across the globes. These values we share among all our colleagues across the globe. So this is something that states actually can rely on. It can help science, the trust in science can help to establish trust between states. Science provides this non-ideological environment for participation, the free exchange of ideas between people, regardless what their cultural background, their national, their governmental, their religious, whatever background is. If we meet as scientists, we talk among scientists. The other parts might come later on. But I'm not interested in the cultural practice of a specific person or what kind of passport a person has. I'm interested in getting a scientific exchange. Science has been regarded, and here I quote the International Science Coalition, as a global public good. The results of science are not belonging to a small community. They don't belong to a region of the world. They don't belong to a specific state. They are there for the whole of humanity. So this is like open science. What we discuss is open science. And let me mention here one term the famous Harvard political scientist Joseph Nye has been mentioning. Science is soft power. Any state in the world, regional cooperation, of course you can use hard power. Of course, people can talk of militarization, but this is only one part. The other part a state or European Union has is soft power. and one should not underestimate what soft power actually can do. I will give you some examples, because times are very turbulent, we all know it. But if we look back in history, what colleagues coming from science actually managed to do, and this is, I'm very proud that the colleagues from science actually managed this, to set up the Antarctica Treaty in 1959. That was at the height of the geopolitical tensions between United States of America and Soviet Union. And scientists pushed the Realpolitik to say, don't let this happen, what happens with the North Pole, what we discuss with the North Pole, with the Arctic now. Antarctica is a continent for science, and you have signatory states. All of the inspections there are free for the exchange. The main purpose is to do science there. Regarding global warming, it's a big issue. Unfortunately, I have a background in social science. They can never use social sciences there. There's no citizenship. But we have, this is actually the only terra we have on Earth that belongs under this international treaty to the whole of humanity. No military purpose, no taking away. Today I learned data is the new oil, no taking away of oil or any gas. This is really a continent for science. And this is what scientists managed. Another example, it was the famous Albert Einstein initiating, together with Bertrand Russell, the Albert Einstein Manifesto, the Pugwash conferences. At the fighting between the two superpowers, and they said, no, stop these nuclear weapons, make a non-proliferation treaty. And they managed to do so. You know, this kind of scientists can enable this kind of bridges when Realpolitik might not be able to do so. Use this kind of stuff that is there. Quickly, we will later on talk on global health issues. This is a cartoon by a cartoonist by the name of Carl, being published in The Economist. We had recently this new coronavirus shaking the world around. This is the first boxing round, the preliminary round, but the next one, is a bit of a Hercules figure waiting outside. We will later on discuss on this, but I thought this is something that we really, it can be an alarm signal for all of us to learn to cooperate, because this is affecting the whole world. This is what a global challenge is at the end of the day all about. No? This is not some Luxembourg and Burkina Faso fighting against someone, but the whole world is affected by it. The same, of course, relates to global warming. It has been already mentioned. This is one of the most dangerous situations nowadays, environmental related leaks, zoonoses, endangering global health systems. And of course, as you see here on this picture, you can not believe in global warming, but I mean, come on, we are living in a world where we actually have states who lose their state territory. We need to discuss about this. We have the first digital nation of the world, of Tuvalu. So that Shaken's law, what does it mean to have a state? State does not exist on its territory anymore. So this is already taking place. We have large conflicts related to loss of biodiversity and global warming. In this graphic, I wanted to point out what needs to be there from a scientific perspective. If you have a global challenge, the first and foremost is you need to have a holistic perspective. You cannot look at a global challenge, only peeping through some small part. It has a planetary view. And we have enough beautiful pictures from our small, beautiful planet. This is the view you need to take for a global challenge. Then, of course, these are core challenges of humanity and as well the planet. We are one species among others living on this planet. So this is like, to have a stabilization. Scientific diplomacy on global warming, if you see here, of course, you have a variety of stakeholders involved. You have transnational cooperation at the United Nations level. You have a global scientific community pointing to these issues since decades. This is not something scientists do since 5 years. This is decade long. And of course, as I said before, it's a global affair, so no state is capable to deal with it on its own. You need to learn to cooperate. Global warming at the same time, and here I refer to Ulrich Beck and his book on World at Risk. He was actually saying global warming is a driving force for cosmopolitanism. I will come later to this point. What we as Europeans specifically, we are the continent who created this idea of cosmos and polis. Of course, ecological risks cause global commonalities. There is an urge for cooperative global institutions. There is a transnational global civil society popping up. And then it might sound as a little bit of a paradoxon, but Ulrich Beck was actually arguing if these global challenges would not be there, if these risks would not be there, we would need to invent them because they make us aware that we have to cooperate or we die together. That is another possibility. Of course, you always have this chance, no? It's not very maybe humanitarian or, I don't know, with the animals and so on and so on. But of course, any challenge has a difficult implication. There is a talk on fairness, justice. We will hear later on primary health care is a good example on fairness, who has access to a health life, no? States and science, of course, we need to discuss. If we are discussing a world shaped again by geopolitical rivalries, there are a lot of states in the world that exist only maybe on this papel, but they are not really in existing where the state has the monopoly of power. I'm quite often on the African continent. 1/4 of the states is a failing or failed state. There are people living there. There's clear connection as well. And of course, you might have different narratives on global warming, on global health, all these issues. But on the right side, you see what multilateral treaties actually being set up thanks to excellent diplomats, to responsible statesmen. We have a lot of these multilateral treaties, and they are there and they exist. As, like I said in the past, the ban of nuclear weapons and so on and so on. So there is a way forward. I had the pleasure, the honor to be one of these 130 experts coming from both worlds, from science and diplomacy, appointed by the European Commission. And I was in a working group that looked at the global outreach of Europe. And all of these really wonderful, it was a wonderful experience. It was like being very close to realpolitik as a scientist, so to say. They formulated recommendations and concrete actions for future science diplomacy. I will not mention all of these concrete actions and recommendations that are there to develop. Please feel free to have a look into this report. But the findings underline some of the strategic priorities. What are European strategic priorities for science diplomacy? Some enabling ones. What is an enabling environment for science diplomacy? And of course, operational instruments, like to strengthen the role of science and technology at embassies and so on and so forth. Of course, scientific integrity must be at the center, although you can use science as a means of communication as well. But here, the point was to foster science for policy. And let me only give you one quotation out of this report, because the role of science for keeping an informed global dialogue cannot be overestimated under these really difficult times where science is attacked in a lot of countries. So let me just quote here from the report. European science diplomacy should aim at preserving spaces for exchange and fostering a shared responsibility for addressing common challenges and protecting global public goods, thereby supporting effective multilateralism of its parts. Of course, here comes again, what is Europe? What is our heritage of Europe? And I come here to try to find, from a science perspective, looking at what the findings of the reports are, the global challenges ahead, and this is something that has not been thought through. I am a scientist, I can live happily if I don't have an answer. I'm always looking for answer, for solution options, but this is not, in German we would say, nicht zu Ende gedacht. This is just like an preliminary remarks. Of course, you have to focus on a big question. Albert Einstein once said, problems cannot be solved with the same way of thinking that created them. Think differently. Think in a different strategic piece. This is the moment when innovation comes up. This is very, very important. Transdisciplinary research, we will have a very diverse group of people then, looking beyond the border of science, looking beyond the border of non-governmental organizations, looking beyond the border of realpolitik, looking beyond the border of diplomacy, get all these people together under a forum. You have to have global narratives. UNESCO has been launching this global citizenship education, and please remind me of Erasmus from Rotterdam. Yesterday I was coming from Zurich. Zurich is a lovely town in Switzerland. Erasmus from Rotterdam was there, and he was appointed to say, please, it's a very honor, be a citizen of Zurich. Erasmus from Rotterdam said, no, I'm a citizen of the world. This is what the cosmopolitan idea is all about. We should not forget what it means. I will come to this point later on. Of course, we have all the ancient Greek philosophy. I know some of colleagues from philosophy are around, so I'm just mentioning here Aristotle, who was making this point, the whole is greater than the sum of its part. Europe is not only European Union and its member states. There is France, there is Austria, there is Hungary, there is This is a bigger picture with a very specific feature. European values, European ideas. We include our colleagues from Norway, from Switzerland, and so on and so on. This is a continent. And last but not least, it has been already mentioned by me, use science. Science speaks a universal language. Scientists can communicate with one another. We have a rational view of the world. Use this ratio. Specifically more, if times are getting, dangerous and so on, get a scientist on board. Specifically, natural scientists are very good to have a rational view of the world. And of course, scientific relations enable bridges to a peaceful future. And the point, of course, is to explore future scenarios to transform the present. I had the pleasure of participating several times now at the Chester Network in Switzerland as well. And they always raise these questions, what's cooking in the laboratories of the future? Of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but the point is we need to make now decisions that are decisive for the future. And of course, we live in an area, there is an epistemology of uncertainty. But realpolitik needs to make decisions. This is clear. It's a different dynamic, no? One cannot forget about this. I come to my final part. I mentioned Erasmus from Rotterdam. We have one, I think in this sense I'm biased, one of the genius of the world, Immanuel Kant, has been writing a philosophical sketch in a time of absolutism in Königsberg, 230 years ago. Immanuel Kant was writing in The Perpetual Peace on, first of all, jus cosmopoliticum. He said what nowadays we would say, I can be a citizen of a specific state. I can be a citizen of a regional federation, and at the same time I'm a citizen of the world. One does not exclude the other. I can have all identities at the same part in me. The world needs Immanuel Kant and his brilliant thoughts. Immanuel Kant was not a hippie. He was not believing, we all love each other. No, he was a strong proponent for international law, respect international law, and he was mentioning the Federation of Free Republics, something that nowadays we call United Nations. If you read the Charter of UN, you find all these ideas formulated by Immanuel Kant. And he was actually risking being guillotined at the time he was writing, no? So this is why he have philosophical sketch at the end of the day. The world actually should not forget, and I'm saying this really as a proud European citizen, what European Enlightenment was about. Merci at the French Revolution, they have the political liberal rights. We should always acknowledge this. And it was actually Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, together with Anders Wickman, in the 50 report to the Club of Rome. He was stating there, the world needs a new enlightenment. We need, not only we as humans, as one species, having rights, as citizens of the world and citizens of a specific state, in old saying republic, but we need to give nature a right as well. Some of the constitutions, Ecuador has a constitution that has a legal identity for nature. Very interesting, no? So I think we should look at cosmopolitanism 2.0 to rethink Kant, to read Kant again. Specifically, I think in times when it seems very like a fairy tale to think about perpetual peace, how to establish perpetual peace. But of course, what is left there, and this is what my experience from this working group was, science needs much, much more to work beyond disciplinary containers, and diplomacy, and so to say, needs to have much more broader view than only to represent a state. We have European ambassadors. Why can we not discuss of global ambassadors? It's just an idea popping up. Albert Einstein actually was talking about this. So to foster science diplomacy for global challenges here is not only an ethical imperative. At the end of the day, if you think of global challenges, it's in everyone's interest. And let me come to my final answer. I raised this question if, science diplomacy is a panacea for global challenges. Of course not. We don't have this kind, it heals and cures everything we are having there. But it's the polycrisis, the rise of anti-enlightenment realpolitik, which makes responsible science policy and scientific thinking more important than ever in addressing global challenges and in finding solution options. We will not present you one solution. There are always more solution options. This is the point then realpolitik has to decide what to do about. But multilateralism and science diplomacy are crucial tools for global policy in managing common future risk scenarios peacefully. And I consider here the role of diplomats to be very decisive for the future, because diplomats are trained experts to navigate complex, difficult scenarios and to work it out not in a military way, but in a peaceful manner. And this costs much less than in a military way. Don't forget about this. Use science and use diplomats. Use the best of both worlds, so to say. And science and diplomacy together, I think, are an unbeatable team, and there is a crucial tool for cooperation in a world faced with common crisis. And of course, as a strategic foresight, we already had several global crises in this century, and without too much like predicting a future, I think the challenges will not diminish. They will not get less, but they will become bigger. And so to say, it needs a lot of voices to sing a song together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Wittmann. This was an impressive overview about what science diplomacy might can do. I will now immediately call the podium on the stage, so impressions are fresh and you can start the discussion. There will be the possibility of questions of the audience later as well, and we were going around with the microphone. So please, Professor Laura Kemmer, Institute of Advanced Studies at University of São Paulo. She holds the German-Brazilian Martius Chair for Humanities and Sustainability, maintained by DAAD and USP, and she's an urban researcher who connects theories and methods from anthropology, geography, and feminist theory. Thank you for being here. Professor Marcelo Pelágio, head of the Laboratory for Experimental Medicine at Fiocruz. Thank you for being here. He will provide insights into the role of Brazilian research institutions as global partners in pandemic response and health diplomacy. Professor Fabiano Tonaco Borges, advisor for the International Cooperation in Science and Technology of the Ministry of Health and researcher at the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the Federal University of Pernambuco. Yes, thank you for being here. Olivier Fontaine is Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of France in Brazil and former Deputy Head of Division for Climate and Environmental Negotiations at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is a diplomat by training and tonight will provide insights in the field of diplomatic tools and global health in nexus to climate. Thank you for following our invitation. And Dr. Rachel Suero, Doctors Without Borders, Regional Coordinator for the Americas and responsible for the access to products for healthcare of the organization. She is a family physician with national and international experience in primary health care, specializing in sexual and reproductive health in humanitarian and crisis settings. Thank you for being here. Yes. And Professor Wittmann will be moderating, so it is with you.
Hello? Yes, I think now it's working. Well, it's a really great pleasure. Let me go over there and give you the interesting part. I think we have a brilliant variety of expert people coming from various backgrounds, and I look forward to the discussion. It has been mentioned already, this very, very strong nexus between climate issues and health issues. Might I start with Deputy Ambassador Fontaine with the question, you're a trained diplomat. You have been working for the inter-IPCC and so on and so on. What are the tools that you have in your diplomatic toolbox to point out to this? I mean, there is a drastic situation, this nexus between environmental risks and health issues. What are the tools that you as a diplomat can use actually to stress what scientists actually have been arguing since a long time?
It works. Hello. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. Good evening, everybody. So it's at the same time a simple and complicated question, and some of the problems and dimensions you have already mentioned in your brilliant presentation, and one essential point I think is that the problems we are talking about, that means climate change, biodiversity collapse, and their health consequences are all due basically to an abuse of power. That's the abuse of power of mankind over nature. We are overpassing the limits of the planet, the limits of nature. And why? Because basically that's first a failure of science. One science, or so-called science, which is economics, which has failed to take into account the external cost of our economic activities. So diplomacy, in a way, is a tool because this is the tool that we humans use to limit power when you can't, and to limit the abuse of power and the brute force, and to share about it and to communicate about it. So diplomacy as a way of communication with all the nations and all the government and of course the civil societies. And it's a bit strange in a way because diplomacy can be seen as the opposite of science. You know, diplomacy, you represent national interest, you defend national securities, you promote your national companies. We are not always acting in the way of science, as you can imagine, as you know. And diplomacy is in the common view is dark area of lies and double talk. And on the contrary, science is the objectivation of problems, of their causes, of possible solution, of actions to take. So you have a whole ground between both of them. But the fact is that also science, and I would dare to disagree a bit with Joseph Nye, if you allow me, because naked science as well as naked truth has absolutely no power, not even soft power in my view. What is good and true and sound for humanity, for humankind, doesn't necessarily implement in good public policies. So we need a tool, which is diplomacy, to pass on from science to a good public policy. So to try to answer your question in a way, diplomacy in this way helps to convey the message of science to policymakers. Okay, so we can try to implement scientific recommendations into public policies, and of course public opinions and business, etc. Diplomacy helps to reformulate science in a way that can be understood and essentially accepted by everybody and by all countries. Because, you know, as you've seen, science delivers sometimes blunt messages on environmental and health risk. On climate, that's simple. Let's stop burning fossil fuels, stop eating meat, stop flying. On biodiversity, that's stop deforesting, stop industrial agriculture, stop eating meat also, stop. On health, that stop using chemical products, and of course it hurts national interest and private interest. So diplomacy is a way of putting these blunt messages into a kind of transitional words, and that's why we are talking so much about transition, ecological transition, etc. Because that's the tool we have to pass on from scientific research to public policies. And the best example is the summary for policymakers of the IPCC and the IPBS, which is the IPCC for biodiversity, and to make it more audible and to generate action. And one other example, we can talk about it later, is, for example, the COVAX initiative during the pandemics, which allowed to gather, I think, $12 billion to distribute vaccines. So that was just a few ideas to open the debate, and thank you again.
Well, merci beaucoup. for giving us an insight in the world of diplomacy. Marcelo, might I continue with you, like an expert on vaccine development? It's just been mentioned, the COVAX initiative. When this new coronavirus popped up, there was an interesting article in Foreign Affairs, and the article was actually only raising the question, lesson learned, question mark. So, did we learn the lesson from the last pandemic regarding vaccine development?
First, thank you very much for the invitation. It's nice to be here. As a former DAAD fellow, I'm very happy to be here in the 100 celebration moment. I hope so. And I would say that we had some evidence that we actually did some good, let's say, we learn with this very bad situation at that moment. Just to recall what happened, at that moment we were facing a new disease. We actually didn't know anything, which is causing it, what would be the disease, how the severity, the transmission rate, how we can do it. We didn't know anything at that time. And only because we had a very strong world work with open science, with every scientist working and opening every data that they have, only because of this, we really, in a record time, we knew which is the agent, what was the disease, how with the transmission, how to deal with it, and actually that we will have to rush to develop a new treatment, a vaccine, or a new medicine to fight the disease. So I would say that's probably the best example that I know from history, from open science, when we, in a very short period of time, in a world effort, we got this. And only because of this effort, we then, something that is very important to point out. People talk a lot about the innovation, but the basis, the stone of the innovation is the research, the basic research. And only because we had this background of basic research, we could deal with this development of vaccines. And in, let's say, very few weeks, we had at least 4 candidates for vaccines. The mRNA technology, that was only a promise that many people from the field told that this would be technically impossible. Now it's not only we had it for for COVID, but now is a backbone for the development of many other vaccines in our days. So it's really what's very important and very, I'd say, specific moment that we had. And this is also very challenging in means of how we deal with the nations since we had this information, because it was not enough to have the vaccines, to develop the vaccines, but these vaccines that to reach people have to go to the end, to the arm of the people, to the arm of the poor people, the arme Leute. So this is what to find to reach them. So the strategies, and for this, the diplomacy was very important at that time. I can talk only for Brazil here, but the Itamaraty and the diplomacy that we had here was crucial, so we can deal with these old regulations for transport of vaccines, the cold chains, and all of this, so we can have this the vaccine that were being produced, and not the vaccine, the end product, but also these the material to produce the vaccines. Fiocruz and many other institutions, and some other institutions in Brazil, developing new fabrics to develop and to produce these vaccines. And we had this challenge to distribute them. Here in Brazil, we have a very decentralized health system that helped a lot, so we can distribute them and reach the very large, very distant places there. But at the same time, we faced the fake news problem. So we have also to tell the people that they should have the vaccine. So the technical, so people have to trust. This, I think this is one of the central words of this debate. People have to trust science, so they should realize that science really wants the best from all the people. So it was another effort, also involve a lot of diplomacy, so to have this trust in order so people can have the vaccines. And at the last point, the one that is very important, so asking more directly the question, so I think we really learned about this because this was something I think was unimaginable some days before. But 15 days ago, the WHO reached the final text of the World Treaty, the Pandemic Treaty. This will be presented in the next World Health Assembly in Zurich in May. So, and we really hope that this will be approved, and then we have this backbone for the next pandemic that we have will not be the same challenge that we have in the past with this COVID.
A little bit of hope at the end. Fabiano, might I come to your side? You're presenting the Brazilian Ministry of Health, so the state. If I look, it's just been mentioned, we have this treaty now, the World Health Organization, it's different member states, but the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the budget, what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has exceeds the budget of the World Health Organization. What is the capacity of the state here? Could you please remark on it?
Thank you very much for having me here. This is a wonderful question. I'm a telepathic, so I knew in advance that you when I ask me, I've written a few words to answer. That's a very important question. We live a time of powerful generosity. Billions of dollars move in the name of goodwill. These flows shape international policy. They influence the future of entire health systems. This is often portrayed as progress, a welcome influx of resources into neglected areas. But we must ask hard questions. Who defines the priorities? Who holds the power? And where do states stand in this philanthropic tide? Tonight, I want to invite you to reflect on the powerful idea, philanthrocapitalism. I draw here on the work of Anne Emanuel Byrne, a leading scholar from the University of Toronto. Philanthrocapitalism applies market logic to social problems. It brings business tools into global health. It turns billionaires into modern donors. They become strategists, policy influencers, even agenda setters. But something shifts when power is unchecked. Unelected actors with concentrated wealth begin to define success in global health. They replace solidarity with soft domination. It is an idiosyncrasy form of imperial capitalism, one cloaked in the language of aid and innovation. Philanthrocapitalism promises efficiency, but it often undermines equity. It celebrates technological fixes, yet it avoids systematic transformation. It is top-down, not bottom-up, autocratic, not democratic. And most of all, it is power without accountability. Let's be clear, this model is not neutral. It reflects a specific worldview, one that treats health as a commodity, populations as markets, solutions as products to scale, not rights to protect. It creates epistemic monopolies, where, quote, evidence, unquote, and, quote, impact, unquote, are defined by those who hold the purse strings. This leads us to the heart of the matter. A state's capacity to participate in global health initiatives is contingent upon its sovereignty. And sovereignty means more than borders. It is the power to set priorities, to produce technologies, to fund public science, and to act without external interference. It includes the financial strength to shape one's own future. But sovereignty is under strain. States in the Global South are invited to, quote, partner, unquote. But often, the terms are already set. Programs come with fixed metrics. Suppliers are pre-approved. Local systems have little room to decide. Too often, aid becomes a pipeline, not a dialogue. Science diplomacy ought not be a path to exploitation. It must not serve as a conduit for unilateral technological dominance on the South by the North, nor it can serve as a subtle tool of exploitation. It must build solidarities rooted in mutual respect. It must strengthen national capabilities and honor the diverse ways of knowing. Science is not a charity project. It is a political field where sovereignty, justice, and cooperation must meet. Now, more than ever, we face a choice. Will global health continue to drift toward privatized control, towards technocratic fixes and donor-driven agendas, or will we reclaim a different path, one rooted in public accountability, in systemic investment, and in scientific solidarity? So, how do you answer the question posed to me today? Sorry. States can only address global health challenges when they are sovereign, and sovereignty must guide us towards multilateralism, built through cooperation, not exploitation. Thank you very much.
So somehow a plaidoyer not to forget the capacity of the state. I come to you, Rachel. You are presenting an organization which is like a key player in global health issue, Médecins Sans Frontières, and at the same time, non-governmental, clearly non-governmental. You're not even allowed to enter a car from the United Nations. No, this is the world of states. Might I ask you, none of us here have been voting for Médecins Sans Frontières. The work you're doing, you're democratically not legitimized what you're doing. How does Médecins Sans Frontières still, work for scientific diplomacy regarding health issues? And I know maybe you can point a little bit, this madam has a vast experience in different parts of the world, so on primary healthcare, maybe relating to that as well.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the invitation, and good evening to everyone. So yes, indeed, MSF was not elected the key player for humanitarian work, but we have been working in the field for more than 50 years now, and facing all the crises that, the terrible crisis, not only armed conflicts, but also all the epidemics and outbreaks. And sometimes MSF is the only organization in the field. And what is one of our strongest sides is that we don't accept money from governments or from private companies. More than 95% of our donors are individual persons. And this gives us the capacity to negotiate with governments and with private sectors and with companies and scientists. So since 1999, MSF has a department that works really close to scientists and academics that pushes for innovation and for new technologies for our patients. We played a crucial role during the HIV/AIDS epidemics in the beginning of the 2000s, close to the scientific community, pushing for new drugs for our patients. During COVID as well, we are close to scientific community and also to governments, not only to accelerate new vaccines and new technologies for COVID, but also to reach the communities with the vaccines and with the treatment for our patients. Now, last week, we just published studies from MSF and from WHO and other stakeholders to test a new treatment for tuberculosis, for instance, pushing for shorter treatment to reach our patients, and consequently, this will allow all the patients with tuberculosis around the world to have better treatments and shorter treatments against tuberculosis. So MSF, yes, we are in the field close to the patients, but we are also close to the government and to the scientific community to allow patients to have treatments and new technologies, new devices, and new treatments. Thank you very much.
Laura, might I come to you now? I think it was mentioned in the evening, science is being attacked. This is like, how do you demolish a democracy? First you attack media people, then you attack scientists. What do you as a researcher, as a scientist, think what can be done in this time of anti-scientific narratives, in an era where we have fake alternative news, in this anti-enlightenment atmosphere? What could be the answers of a scientist?
Thank you, Veronika, for your brilliant introduction, for your tough questions. Thank you, Katharina, for inviting me as well in your role as the DAAD director, which is the institution I will be also sharing my knowledge from. So yeah, it's an honor to join this important conversation on the relevance of science diplomacy, which is actually a new debate to me, in the field of global health, which is not so new to me, a topic that becomes ever more urgent in times of geopolitical and planetary crisis, as we have heard from the followers. Following the insights from Mr. Olivier Fontaine and Mr. Marcelo Machado on the role of climate, biodiversity and health diplomacy, and the challenges raised by my colleague Rachel Soero and Mr. Fernando Borges regarding legitimacy and agency in global health action amid growing nationalism and pressure on multilateral organizations, I will focus on your important question now, just posed. What is our responsibility as researchers and as institutions, I would add, in the face of anti-science politics and the systematic production of misinformation, what the ambassador has just called fake news in her introductory speak? Let me approach this from the perspective of planetary health, a field that insists we cannot longer view human health and environmental health as separate. As stressed by the ambassador, again in her introductory speech, acknowledging this interrelation is crucial. And this is a conviction we just talked about. I believe I also share with many other colleagues from other sectors. Planetary health is more than a scientific claim. It is a call to reimagine how knowledge is produced, shared, and acted upon. And it is precisely here that science diplomacy becomes essential, not just to defend science, not just as a defensive position, but to evolve it by embracing its complexities, diversities, and connections. And this is actually very different from what my colleague Borges has just emphasized on this idea of the technological fix, right? It's about complexity and about defending and also evolving it. So speaking from my experience at the DAAD Martius chair, fostering knowledge exchange between Germany and Brazil, which is my role in the chair, I would like to share insights based on two current research projects I'm involved with. One is a binational ProBral project funded by DAAD and CAPES on planetary health and multi-species cohabitation in Berlin, São Paulo, and Porto Alegre. and another project funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in the DAAD framework, in which we have contributed to develop methods to bridge academic and practical knowledges on urban health, conducting case studies in São Paulo. From our work with these projects at the intersections of urbanization and planetary health, we have learned that the most effective antidote to misinformation is not just better communication, but better collaboration across disciplines, sectors, and community. So what I would like to argue here is that we need transdisciplinary knowledge production, keyword that also popped up in Veronika's introduction, that involves not only academics, but also citizens, policymakers, and the private sector. In São Paulo, for example, we collaborate closely with the municipal secretariats of health and the environment, particularly for those who are from Brazil, through the so-called PAVES program for green and healthy environments. We work alongside community-led greening initiatives, recycling cooperatives, waste pickers, homeless people, architecture and planning agencies, students, and senior researchers from both the natural and social sciences. Together, we are co-producing knowledge on the lived intersections of environmental conditions and public health, addressing challenges like water pollution, floodings, heat exposure, and food insecurity in the city. And a key instrument we have mobilized that enables this transdisciplinary collaboration is Brazil's Cursos de Extensão, a curricular model. It's curricular, so it's compulsory for me as a professor at University of São Paulo, that extends the university beyond its traditional walls. Through these extension courses, universities create spaces where community groups, public officials, and activists engage in genuine dialogue with students and faculty, not as passive recipients of knowledge, but as co-creators. So this approach, I believe, democratizes knowledge production, strengthens public trust in science, and ensures that research responds to the realities people face every day. It's a model that other countries can learn from, especially now when connecting science and society has never been more critical. And I think it's not surprising that several panels at this year's VBI conference, for those who are attending it, focus on the potential of extension courses for internationalization in higher education. The transdisciplinary and participatory spirit of the Brazilian academic extension model also resonates with what the European Framework for Science Diplomacy, co-authored by Veronika Wittmann, emphasizes, that science diplomacy must be inclusive, participatory, and locally grounded. And this is especially important in global and planetary health, where environmental and health emergency create the so-called wicked problems, complex challenges that we can only address by bringing together humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, policymakers, practitioners, local communities to create knowledge that is both legitimate and actionable. So anti-science politics thrive when institutions feel distant or elitist. Our response must be rooted in trust. It must be rooted in relevance, and it must be rooted in co-creation. And in this spirit, I would advocate for a planetary health diplomacy that is not only about negotiating international agreements, but also about supporting inclusive participatory practices of knowledge production that can actually transform, I believe, and this has to do with climate anxiety, for instance, transform feelings of helplessness into new possibilities for action. So it's about making science visible, relevant, and rooted in the places where people live and experience planetary crisis. So let me close by saying that the attacks on science are real. I think we all experience it, but so is our capacity to respond. Not defensively, but creatively, differently, as you have stressed in your introduction, not only with data, but also with solidarity. And not only in conference rooms, and also not only in these kinds of settings, but also in neighborhoods, in clinics, in gardens, and in classrooms. Thank you. Sorry for taking a bit longer.
Interesting. Trust has been mentioning a lot, no, among the participants. Trust and collaboration. we are doing perfect with time. I warned in the beginning we need to put something, but we're doing perfect with time. The second round, I want to engage all of you, is really a word rap format. Mention maximum 3 points, maximum. It has been already said, we had an era like of globalization, now we're entering maybe deglobalization, but what we know from scientific evidence is nationalism is globalizing. It's a contrafact what we actually would need for trust and collaboration. What are the chances for cooperation with regard to global health, given this scenario of this rising and this globalization of nationalism? 3 points. Might I start from here, Marcella?
I would be optimistic on that point. I think it's cooperations has no after COVID. I would say that cooperation has no turning back points there. So I really think that even if nationalism is rising, people will not accept a way back with this cooperation because they saw that we solve the biggest health crisis in the world in 2 years or 3 years. So I think in your presentation you mentioned this because one of the points is that this kind of crisis, one nation cannot solve this problem alone. And I think people realize that if we look at the health issues. So pandemics, we say it's every day. It's not a matter if we have new pandemics. We know that we will have. The question is, which will be these pandemics and when it will happen. So there's a very big effort worldwide in this preparedness for new pandemics, and it's a very very say liquid beyond the nations, around the institutions. So the hub from the WHO for preparedness, for just to mention one example. So I think it's cooperation, and science can give this testimony on this. So I think even if you have this kind of, if you have this increasing of nationalism, if a crisis arises, people will know that they have to have cooperation, especially on health.
A very positive picture. Laura, could you give us the same one?
Yes. I will make one point only, I guess, which will be about planetary thinking again. And I think it relates to what you just said, and I think particularly the insights, of course, we gained from the COVID pandemic point to this kind of planetary thinking that crosses, as I try to defend both science and politics, public sector, private sector, civil society, and so on and so forth. And I think this is something that I'm also a hopeful scientist, that gives me hope, and that also replies a bit to what you stressed in your introduction, Veronika, when you said actually that when you cited the Club of Rome and you cited this idea of a new enlightenment, and then you gave the example of rights of nature, right? So there is something as a zeitgeist forming, which I think is very interesting, and this is something that I like to work with, to actually use as a tool when I build communities that cross disciplines and that also cross sectors, because I think planetary thinking, for those of us who are natural scientists, planetary boundaries are being discussed in climate science. For those of us who are from the social science and humanities, as myself, we know in Latin America Arturo Escobar, we know Bruno Latour in France, we know Achille Mbembe in Africa, and these are all scholars that are working on a new planetary thought. So this is really a huge potential for actually connecting different scientific disciplines, and I believe also emerging needs in society in the face, as I mentioned very quickly, climate anxiety. And I think one of the biggest challenges, I'm not an expert on this field, but one of the biggest challenges also with what you were asking me about, misinformation, distrust, in science, scientific knowledge production, is this feeling of passivity and of distancing. And this is caused by these global challenges and wicked problems. So we have to find boundary concepts that help us to actually bridge these debates. And I believe that the planetary and planetary health in extension is a very interesting concept.
Rachel, please.
Yes, so from the civil society point of view, MSF, it is one of the biggest organizations, but we're not alone. And we can see from the field, we have a lot of very vibrant civil society. It's small organizations that they can see that they are not alone as well. So as my colleague was just mentioned, these projects that she sponsor from extension projects that we call here in Brazil. This is super important to put in touch the civil society in the field, the scientific community, and sometimes the government as well. Thinking about Brazil, that you have as well a big health system, and Brazil is not the only one. So I'm also optimistic that even though we have this huge nationalism arising, I don't think that the civil society and the communities will just abandon the idea to be together, to be connected, and to push their thoughts and their needs up. We have a thought here in the Brazil, in the indigenous community, that they say that they will not allow to discuss about them without them. So I think it is about this. We need to include everyone, and it's one way to think about a better future.
What is the answer of a diplomat?
So 3 points. Well, first, an optimistic one, and usually I'm not the optimist in the room. I've spoiled so many dinners talking about climate change or biodiversity loss. But the optimistic one would be that, you know, the global scientific effort made inside the IPCC on the IP base, I think is in our history, human history, it's the biggest cooperation we have ever had to produce science and to produce truth for public policy challenges. So I think, and it's alive, it's going on, it works. So I think we can be optimistic about this. The pessimistic point is that in spite of 40 years of IPCC reports and 20 years of IPBS reports, public action is not at the scale of the challenge we are facing. And so that's of course a source of preoccupation. And the third point would be to emphasize the idea of widening the scientific scope, first by supporting science in developing countries, because so-called developed countries are overrepresented at the IPCC and IPBES. And to enlarge these frontiers. I remember 10 years ago when we were preparing the negotiation of the Paris Agreement, we had this event at the UNESCO where we gathered many people from indigenous people from all over the world to see their knowledge, the so-called indigenous people knowledge about climate change and biodiversity loss, and especially about climate change. You know, their expertise with birds flying at such season or more or less, or the snow, etc., and to connect it with the scientific method, let's say the Occidental science, the Western science. And that was really, really useful, not only for, I think, for scientific from the so-called developed world, but also for indigenous people to be recognized as contributors to the global effort. So let's go on with this also.
Okay, Fabiano, the final rep.
I will try. Let's first a disclaimer. I am an internationalist by definition. I'm a communist, so I believe in internationalism. But my point is, we have to understand nationalism. What kind of nationalism we are talking about nowadays? That nationalism comes from the North experience of exceptionalism, or that nationalism that freed us, for example, in the South, from the external power. So I work with international cooperation in science since 2010. I did a lot of cooperation, and with US and Germany, Spain, now with China. And science is a very good, I agree with you, a very good path to cooperate for the humanity, for the planetary health, we call now One Health. But the challenges are there. This multilateralism that we know so far, I think, is falling apart, even though we have trying to keep very good ideas up. For example, last year, the Brazilian government made a very good deal with in the healthcare, creating the coalition for local production, trying to overcome the problem of lack of supplies, what we suffered here. So, and I think we have to understand, they do a better job understand nationalism, because nationalism is a very powerful idea. And then how you create, that's why I wrote that we have to rebuild multilateralism from other perspectives that consider our history, our social problems, and then look forward in the better future.
A different concept. Well, thank you, all of you, for the perfect rep. I do know some people need to rush to a dinner table, and I think there is a reception coming along. So maybe to invite all of you to join and raise some of the questions there. I think there was a lot, brain thought for tonight, and let me just, I find it very stimulating, actually, to see these different perspectives and to talk on this, like, polycrisis. Let me just make one final statement by quoting Winston Churchill, who once said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." So, in this sense, be courageous and let's take up these challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
No questions, or you need to go, or?
I will need to go, yes.
So, well, yes, then we just continue. But if there are questions from the audience and someone would like to raise a question, and Olivier, if you have to go, you just go. I'm very sorry. Thank you to Olivier Fontan and having a critical view. But yes.
Change of dramaturgy. We are
Yes.
allowed to.
Yeah, no, we have still some minutes left. If
Perfect.
there are questions, please.
Perfect. Please just raise your hand and we put the microphone to you.
Hi, I'm Natalia Codo. I work at KfW here in Brasília, and it was very interesting, this discussion. Thank you very much. And we talked about diplomacy, about international cooperation, about transnational and transcendental cooperation. And there is a question in my mind during all the presentation: what's the role for the borders that we have nowadays in this context. Thank you.
In fact, we work outside of the borders, in fact, because if you take a look at the big crisis speaking, and we have a lot of armed conflicts around the world, but we know that we are facing now all the climate people on the move. So, and on the other hand, we can see that the borders are trying to be closed, but by experience, I've been working with Doctors Without Borders by 15 years, and I saw crises like Ebola, like COVID, and we can't avoid people to move around the borders. So even though we have a government and you have borders, at the end of the day, people continue to move, and they continue to pass through borders. How we will solve this conflict, I don't have the answers. I just say that for us, we try to be in the both sides of the borders, and if there is a 1/3 side of the borders, we will be trying to be there. But for what do with the government for the borders, I don't have the answers.
Borders are very important to play a key role it's a barrier in many stages for international cooperation, but science is a very powerful vehicle to connect people without borders. I am an example of that. So that's why I think we have to work for a planetary consciousness and to expand inclusive education and science for all, and then I think we will have a better future.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm Nicole from the Universidade do Oeste de Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil. I was listening to all of you speak, and I'm attending the FAUBI conference as well. And I was just trying to think, we talked a lot about science, but we know that science is very closely related to the university as well. Many of the scientists are also our professors. And I was wondering, at a moment when universities are sort of under attack, at the moment, I'm originally from North America, I won't say what country, but I'm someone who's originally from North America. I would like to know, it's a two-way street. How can the administrators of the universities best support scientists at this moment? And also where you see our role, what is the university's role in defending science? I hope that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't want to emphasize borders even more, but I'm, of course, in my role involved in meetings between high-level members of universities in Germany and in Brazil. And I find it very interesting how the idea of extension course formats, which I mentioned briefly in my talk, is being celebrated across these, in these discussions. And this is actually something that happens in a geopolitical moment where funding, and so the attack is not everywhere the same, right? We are living a moment in Brazil, for instance, where we have a momentum for extending. So this is a very interesting moment where international scientific communities look at Brazil also, and particular countries like Germany who want to collaborate on climate innovation, on climate research, on planetary health, on global health, are trying to build partnerships on this level. I think there is a funding opportunity building also, but we all have a role as, or I would say a responsibility as scientists as politicians, as diplomats, as civil society representatives, to actually push stakeholders even more to invest in these kinds of transdisciplinary knowledge productions, because again, I think these kinds of attacks really need also creative solutions and solutions that are close to realities of people, and particularly close to those most affected by these problems. And I think this is something where really transdisciplinary and in these formats of extension can really be very interesting. Yeah.
One final question, is there? Sorry.
No, just one point very briefly. I agree completely, but there is something also that I think we can do. We have a very important role in the universities and research centers. I can talk only from Brazil here, but we have to deal every day with the politicians, so they can realize the importance of the science that they have, so we can be more supported by them. And for this, we can have a very strong partner, that is the population. So one thing that we can do in the university and research center is to invest in the popularization of science. So to get people inside the institution, so the day of open doors, so to invest with people, to teach in the schools. Many of our foundations of support of science are giving money for some of these kind of effort. So this is something that at the same time we bring population to this side of the table, so they can realize the importance of science. And at the same time, these are the people that is voting for the politicians that we have to deal with. So in the last National Conference of Science Technology last year, this was a really big point stressed out on this. So we have to do basic science of excellence, innovation excellence, and also this popularization of science of excellence, so we can have new scientists and a better, so people can be better voting people, so we can have better countries in the future.
So I would say one last question being popped up. Please, Nina.
Thank you. Yes, you started with saying the private foundations that are not democratic elected, and nor is Doctors Without Borders. But I'm thinking now, who is being elected and what is being elected? I'm quite happy we have those organizations. So this is a little bit a thing, yeah, it's not so easy to deal with. And if we would not have this, and yeah, and for example, the World Health Organization is really under pressure, and if certain countries are withdrawing, so what do we do with that? So yeah, it's perhaps more of a statement, but you know, you cannot only blame. It's important work being done as well.
Wait. Yes, I totally respect your point. I think we live in a, I don't believe that our democracy. Thomas Piketty in 2014, yes, he wrote a book, a very well-known book about the capitalism in the 21st century. And he said that too much money in the hands of the few would undermine democracy. So we can ask ourselves very truthfully, what kind of democracy we live in? So I think we live in more in a plutocracy in the Western world than a democracy. But this is the best way we have so far. So at the government, we are very pressured by the state legislative. So for the people, it's different. It's different when you have a billionaire that instead of paying its taxes and push this money to a foundation. Of course, you do charity, but you have a lot of control in the government, and it's different, I think. This is my point. And to a cash question, that was wonderful. I totally agree with them. Political organization. A friend of mine who works, he's a emeritus professor at the University of Massachusetts. He's living in Vermont, and they were doing protests in favor of Harvard. So the whole country, yes, and he showed me. So we have to engage more in politics, I think.
No, just very, very quickly. I just wanted to say I didn't understand your question as a questioning of what people like Rachel are doing, organizations like MSF are doing in terms of are they really democratically elected. But what I find very interesting, how it provokes us to reflect on accountability. And this connects back to the idea of what I learned in this session today of science diplomacy, because you have mentioned scientific principles as something that is crucial to this debate, and actually crucial in a world where political correctness is being attacked on a basis of not having a basis, right? But it has a basis. It has scientific and scientific ethical principles as its foundation. And this is transparency, this is reliability, these are many of the principles we are all familiar with, but it's also accountability. And I think this is where it's really interesting. If I produce a policy paper, which I'm doing right now, I need to prove this because I'm not an expert in policy making, so I need to interact with other sectors to be accountable and authentic in the work and the knowledge I'm disseminating and producing. So I think this is really something that, beyond being elected democratically or not, is really interesting, and something that I have learned from these discussions on science diplomacy, actually, how other mechanisms are very important to support democracy in a way.
Can I just...
Now you want
just, yes. Yeah, no, just to, yeah. No. Yeah. Just to complete, I think that's it, thinking about MSF. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, just thinking about MSF, I think that's it. For us, accountability, it is one of our principles to have neutrality, transparency, independence, but at the end, the accountability for our donors, it's very important, and for the communities where we are working, and we are speaking out for those communities. So it's a huge responsibility to do our témoignage from what people are facing, and how we engage with the other partners. If you're allowing someone to do a clinical trial with a population that we are assisting, we have a huge responsibility at the end to really show that this new drug will provide a better treatment for our patients. And this makes us a kind of respected and legitimate by the population and by the other NGOs as well.
Well, then, obrigado to all of you. I'm trying my best. I'm so brand new in Brazil, only one day here. It was a real pleasure to have you here on board, and I think there is a lot that we can later on now discuss in an informal part, and I have the pleasure to give the final words to Nina.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. I think we have all a lot of, food of thought, food for discussions later, hunger, hopefully, and I invite you for the celebration now and reception. In the residence is just on the, just in front here where you came in, so please meet you there.